We are live, y'all. Check this out. It's the special 420 episode of Spittin with Spitter. I'm TJ Spitter. That's JC. I'm going to introduce him correctly in a moment. Real fast, let me shout out my sponsor, Lehigh Vape, 822 Nazareth Pike. Go there for all your vaping needs. Tell them TJ sent you. They will take care of you. Again, that's Lehigh Vape, 822 Nazareth Pike. Go there. Tell them I sent you. Now, let's get started with this show, man. My guy, JC, otherwise known as the San Andreas mobster.
Yeah, X will say, and that even putting a name like that's a little bit a lot, but that was the era we were in California, and
can we say allegedly? We'll start with allegedly.
Allegedly, for the most part. For the most part, allegedly. That's a new lawyer term I'm going to come up with. For the most part, allegedly, Your Honor. Not 100% allegedly. Mostly allegedly. Judge will be like, I'm declaring a mistrial. I don't want to hear any more from this guy.
He's talking too much.
Yeah. So, throughout Cali in the 90s, there was different mob guys all over. We didn't really know one another, truth be told. It wasn't quite as organized as the feds would have alleged. Although we were actually much closer than we had realized it since all this stuff has happened, which I've been away from the game since 2001. Talking to Ori Spotto, for instance, who you guys have probably seen on Vlad TV. You guys have seen he's done some of our shows and some of the other ones. He was affiliated with Sonny Francis, Colombo family, and he, of course, was in Los Angeles for years and still is now. One of his right-hand guys, it turned out, knew one of mine in the 90s. I didn't find this out, though, till about 3 months ago. So little did I know I was 2 steps away from where Ori and Sonny Francis and all those guys were with what they were doing. I'm in the middle part of the state. I'm in Fresno, which is the central part of California. So they were about 4 hours south of me in LA and that whole area down there. And then the Bay Area is about 3 hours northwest from me. That's San Francisco, San Jose. There were other mob guys up there, apparently Bonanno guys in San Jose throughout the 90s. And then there was other ones in Sacramento. And it was always a constant battle. I'm reading documents now from the Highway Patrol and from other state cops from the 90s. And in their intelligence reports, they talk about how all the families from all over America, New York, Chicago, the Detroit family, which is who I was affiliated with, were constantly sending out, they call them reinforcements. They're sending reinforcements out here. It seemed like every time the cops would bust a group, somebody else would show up, and then they would work with the guys that were already here. And one of the other things that really hasn't been told is how we worked with Hispanic guys, Mexican guys, filled in the gaps for us, manpower. They were really good, a good for us in the 90s. We all worked together. We were bros and homies and all that. They were great. They kept their mouths shut. I had a couple of direct friends arrested who took, one guy took a 14 to 15 year plea deal rather than say anything. He just signed I'm guilty on 2 major charges type thing and send me away and hit with the 3 strikes law. And that's from real dedication when guys are keeping their mouths shut. And if a guy's signing a deal like that, that means he was probably looking at 20 or more, and prosecutors sign deals like that just so they don't have to try the case and spend, 100,000 plus on a trial if they can still get a decent amount from a guy. So that's one of the not so told stories either, is that we had other people who were not Italian. I'm of Irish descent, for full disclosure, half Scottish, half Irish, so I'm not Italian either. There we had Hispanics, we had lots of other guys that helped us out and ensured we stayed successful. So, when I do finally really, go through telling the story of what we did here in the 90s, that's definitely going to be a part of it, and in the book or whatever I end up doing ultimately from here.
So let's start at the beginning. How where were you born and how did you get to where you're at right now?
Yeah, Fresno, and I was born in the mid 70s, 75. And so the area that I grew up in, it's a good sized city, and there's other cities, smaller cities around it, and then a lot of farm fields. And in the 80s I'd say 70s on, when they got rid of that Bracero program, which used to be the guest worker program with Mexico, to where they'd work in the fields and they'd make good money. They'd get to send the money home. We didn't really have a lot of people immigrating to California. The guys would come up and work. They'd make American type wages, and they'd live like royalty down there in Mexico. Well, after they got rid of that program, people were starting to come up and stay, because it becomes costly to go back and forth between California and Mexico, especially this far north. And, right. And that means the families move up as well. And that means you set up connections. And ultimately, what happened was, it made it very easy for you to have cartel type connections ultimately, for regular guys too, because you got guys that are directly from central and southern Mexico in many cases, working in the farm fields, and their kids go to school with you. And the kids are bilingual. Oftentimes, the young homies, if you will, their parents were hardworking farm workers, and they were just not able to take care of them. They were working so much, they weren't able to really parent them. And what happened? The kids are on the street, and that sort of created the way that the Hispanic gangs in my area started to evolve. And that's the kind of area that I grew up in. And I got connected that way. So I was basically a good kid for the most part, up until, I get into the 15, 16 range. And
it's usually not to interrupt you, but that's usually where it starts for all of us.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And, that's why I have a daughter now who's almost 16. And so I'm very aware of what's going on. And luckily for me, my daughter looks up to me like I'm God himself in some cases. So, because she could see, wow, my dad used to do all this stuff. All right. So, I have ex-gang member friends that go to the same churches that I go to, whose kids are the same way. Ironically enough, we were these crazy guys, mob guys and gang types or prison gang types. And our kids are like, we don't want nothing to do with that crazy stuff. We'll go ahead and go to church, and we'll go to school, which is good in that sense, that at least something good comes from it. But so yeah, 15, 16. And so that's when the partying type stuff happens. And with, the other types of crimes evolve from there, with theft and other stuff. And I got arrested for my first time at 16. And I was actually put into the toughest unit of the juvenile hall just for one night, okay, with two other guys who were arrested with me. And we were just, we weren't really experienced criminals at that point. And I got put into a cell with this Mexican dude and this other white dude. Both of them were going to be shipped to Preston, which is, for those of you in California, that facility. That was the craziest youth authority camp in the 70s, 80s, 90s, into the 2000s. I believe they shut down most of it now, but if it's open, they probably have done a lot to change it, because it used to be crazy. And they didn't attack me or anything like that. I actually got along with them. And that's a really bad signal, because that sent the signal to me that I can be chill and cool with these crazy dudes and be all right. And they liked my jokes and stuff. And they, it was just, it wasn't really tough. And I was told that it would be. And of course, it's only one day, but you get a taste of it, and you get out and you're like, okay, well, maybe the juvenile system ain't as bad as they freaking claim. If this is what they're saying our worst is, and the one day I was there, we got along. And in fact, my two co-defendants ended up into a fight with this guy that was in the unit, and nobody said anything. Nobody told. The counselors didn't even notice. And, they racked this dude, and we thought it was entertainment. And that's just one day there. And so it was just the wrong message for me at the time. And so it catapulted, that kind of stuff just, changes the way that I did stuff. And fast forward, when I'm 17, 1992, 93 comes along. the individual that I knew that ended up introducing me to Cosa Nostra, he and I and our other homie types, we met in a really important Mexican guy, cartel connected, older guy, old school guy. He schooled us. And when my guy moved back to Michigan in 1993, I was 18 around that time. That's when I started getting approached about it. And I held off at first, but ultimately I went through because he set up a deal that didn't go through. I got a frantic, very emergency call from him from Michigan saying, hey, I sent my guy out there. He's in California. The guy that was supposed to connect us is gone. Can't hear from him, that kind of thing. And he's like, Jeff, you got to do something. You got to help me. And so I went and met the guy, and that's it. Just started from there. So ironically enough, I had declined this for a while. When I approached my Mexican friends about it initially, they were like, "No, we don't want to do that because the mafia has a lot of surveillance on them." And this is 1993, 94. They were already like, it's bad enough having to keep the DEA from us. You know, we don't need to be attracting more attention. But so that's, I ended up getting involved that way, and then it went from there. So that, kids, sometimes when you help your friends,
disclaimer,
you open up that door, and by the time you get out the house you just entered, you're a completely different guy. So
yeah, absolutely. We got some comments coming in. I just want to reach out to them real fast. We got Alan, who is my older brother, who actually runs the show with me. My guy, love you, bro. Chris Van said I was in Green Monster in Newark, New Jersey. Scares me so much, it was insane. So now moving forward, you're 19 and you take a frantic phone call that opens the door.
Now I was 18, but yeah.
18.
That's that. Yeah. Yeah.
And then it just progresses. How do you then involve yourself with the mob?
Well, so basically when I went out to, he was at one of the hotels near the airport out here. And, you know, right away, it's like, here, lift up your shirt. We, you know, make sure you have no wiretaps and no cameras, none of that stuff. And I was like, I let him know that this really wasn't something I was trying to do. But hey, if it keeps Daniel from getting, having any problems, then let's talk some. And I did take him around. I said, hey, let's go grab something to eat. We went to this really kick-ass Mexican food place that we used to go to. He really liked that because he hadn't really eaten authentic Mexican food before, being from Michigan in the 1990s. And I made him feel cool. Like he told me before I dropped him off, I didn't get him what he wanted. I looked around and my guys were like, hang on, man. You're going from 5 to 10 pounds of weed, and now you want 10 to 20, and you're talking about buying in that much consistently and then going up from there even, and
red flags.
Oh yeah. 2, 3, 5, 20 red flags, basically,
right.
But he told me before I dropped him back off to head out, he said, you really saved the day for him. You made me feel like I have a friend out here. And that's a phrase that you hear from mob guys in general. A friend of ours, friend of mine, that I didn't know any of that stuff at the time. Furthest place from mafia territory, or at least that I had thought. So, friend out here, and you made, you saved the day for him, and then it just went from there. And we start connecting the Mexican brick bud, the AZ weed. We got to BC bud ultimately, as well as the high grade grown in California, Mendocino, Humboldt, the whole Emerald Triangle up there. Right. And then into gambling too. I set up dice games and whatnot. I had other we had casino stuff we were doing in the 90s as well.
Wow. So at what point do you start moving weight for these guys?
Well, it took a while initially. That
doesn't happen overnight.
No. It not in my case. Now, I'm sure there's some guys out there who may have, but it didn't happen with me. Then again, I was an 18-year-old, relatively clean cut looking kid, so it's, but I had good context before, but my guy had some of the same ones, and the ones we had were the guys that initially didn't want to do anything. So I had to go elsewhere, and developing that stuff takes a while. And so ultimately, I think it was about 2-3 months or so down the road when we started to really get this going, getting 20 of them at a time, and I have to admit, I was so nervous. One of the first times I was driving with 10 pounds of weed in my trunk. The first time, I had that much weed at once, and, because that's when you start thinking, oh, dude, this is mandatory sentence time. This isn't the kind of stuff anymore where, you can't tell the judge I was holding it for a friend. That whole telling your dad it's not mine excuse goes out the window when you get to that level. And but I was like, it just sort of started to hit me that, man, I'm really getting in deep here. And this is not going to be a joke. And it's not a theory. It's not the same as waiting outside some dude's house for him to go buy a 20 sack or an ounce even, or a pound for that matter. It's the real deal. Guys start asking more questions, and, that's when it starts getting planned out much, much more. And, one of the things, like I was saying, driving with 10 of them, one of the methods that I learned that guys do when they buy 50 or 100 pounds at a time, if they are already in the city where it's going to be going, they'll move only 10 or 20 at a time. So if they are pulled over, they only lose part of what they got. And then the driver is looking at less time, which means less chance of him turning into an informant on you. And right. So I started learning stuff like that, that I hadn't even known before, that I thought I was pretty well schooled from, the initial, schooling I got from this guy's name was Marcelo that initially taught Daniel and I and some of the others around our area this stuff. But it just started going up from there. And then I had Chaldeans that were affiliated with Cosa Nostra there in Detroit, which I didn't even know what a Chaldean was at the time. When I first heard them talk in their languages, I'm like, the hell kind of, it sounds rude in today's world, but I'm like, what are you saying? Where's this language from again? Yeah, it's from Iraq and Syria places. I'm thinking immediately, oh crap, these guys hijack planes, and then, because back in the 80s, they only showed them on the news whenever they hijacked a plane, dude.
Right.
And then they joked. We thought it was funny. We joked around a bit, but they didn't know who some of the Asian groups were, like Hmongs and Cambodians that are out here in California that I was connected with in some cases. They're like, what the hell is a Hmong? Then again, for the people in the Asian community, not intended to be any kind of thing. I'm just telling you, this is the kind of stuff. There's no internet at the time. There's no Google. Most people didn't even really know. If you lived in California, you didn't know much about what happened in Michigan. Right. If you lived in New York, you might know about New Jersey and, maybe Pennsylvania and the states around you guys, but you're not going to know what's happening in Kentucky usually or places, So, we looking back, it was kind of a good experience. And I got to meet a lot of different types of people way before, a lot of people in today's world have these types of interactions on a day-to-day basis. Well, I was having it then, and we're having to set up big things. And these guys, they had been through crazy stuff back there in like Iraq and Syria and places like that, fighting like Saddam Hussein's government and stuff. This is 1993, 4 and 5. And the Mexican guys out here were well tested too. I'd meet guys that had been in some of the worst prisons in here, San Quentin and Corcoran and Wasco and places like that, and so the good thing about all of the craziest guys is you can trust them the most to not be involved with law enforcement. And so you go through so many different types of people as the original question has to do with moving up the ladder with the weed stuff. You hit it. You'll have a guy for a while, you lose him. Then you get a guy from a different group for a while, then you have others that overlap. Then you have guys who disappear. You don't know if they've been caught. You don't know, it's crazy because in the movies and in a lot of these TV shows, they make it sound like we know everything. You know, we know who's investigating us, and hey, you know, this law enforcement agency is watching us right now, so make sure you don't go do this. All right. You don't know. I've almost been arrested once or twice where I was in traps, and it could have been the FBI, could have been the DEA, could have been state cops. Don't know.
Right.
You know when you've been set up, though, usually, you know, and sometimes stings don't go the way they're supposed to. And that's another thing. The cops don't always get it right. Sometimes they set up arrests and they mess up, and then they pull out at the last minute, and you can tell you were almost picked up,
Right.
you know. And so it's not what you hear from a lot of the shows. So you'll get up to 50 pounds a month at times, or 100 or 200, 250. Then your guy's gone, and you don't know what happened. If he got spooked by something with you, something else happened, another guy spooked him, and now he's out. Or it could be the way he does business. He could be one of those guys that leaves town for 6 months at a time. There are guys like that too that will come back in around. They're not going to tell you I'm skipping out. They'll come in, they'll deal for 3-6 months, make a good amount of money, and they're out. And then, and you know, so the cops go on to somebody else. Then they come back in and take control again. You know, there's lots of ways guys did it. You know, so with me, it just evolved, and it just, you know, and then of course the BC Bud and all that started popping up during that time. So it was a different market, and then you have to evaluate: am I going to get involved with this or am I not? And you know, there's some opportunities that I took, other ones that I didn't take, and there's some opportunities looking back that I missed. Things that ways I could have made money and done things, but I didn't do it, or it may not have even thought about it. So, but I'm not in prison.
It's the little things,
I'm on the
right?
internet with you, bro. So
Yeah, it's fact.
I'm all right.
The other night we were talking on the phone, and you had told me this wild story on how you were blocked. Can I say this? Can we talk about the telephone conversation we had the other night? How you were blocked? Sure. Can you give the Spittin' with Spitter audience an exclusive on how you were blocking wiretaps?
Okay, so you guys back in the, you know, the day most people had cordless phones, and as you guys know, with a cordless phone, it's got the handset part, you know, and the antenna hits the base station on the phone, and that base station's plugged into the phone line, dials out from there. Well, I had discovered that you could use CB antennas and other antennas that you put on big rigs, or you can put on cars and trucks. They have the magnetic ones. You plug those into the right kind of phone, and you pull up in front of someone's house, and your antenna can connect to theirs. And that means you get a dial tone, which means you can dial out, and you're technically on their phone line. And so there would be no way to wiretap me on that. There was no way for them to do it. And I didn't just drive around with that antenna or that phone set up on me either. I only took that out of my house when I was going to make drug calls specifically. And so I would call my 313 numbers, which you guys know from plenty of movies by now. That's the area code for Detroit. I'd call all my 313 numbers from there. So I started making a map of which houses had the right kind of phones. Then I discovered that some of the antennas had different frequencies, and then the brands would get upgraded. So and if I had been pulled over with it, chances are the cops would have thought I was a credit card scammer rather than a drug runner. Because back in the day, those guys would go around rich people's houses and listen in on their phone calls, hoping they could catch, stuff they could use to get, their card numbers being said, or dirt on them, blackmail artists, private detectives probably use that too, I would imagine. But they would have thought it was some fraud angle, and I never got pulled over with anything like that. But yeah, I was able to do that. And by the time I was done in 2001, that was barely when Ericsson flip phones were starting to come out. And so we were using pagers throughout most of the time. I could have got cell phones way earlier than that, but I was always leery of that. I had friends who had them in the business, and I just thought they were bad luck. And I just assumed that they could be all tapped. I didn't really know much about it, but with what I was doing, I could guarantee it was not being tapped. You know, they'd have to page me because, you know, I'd be like, there's no number you're calling me at. You're going to have to page me, and you'll just have to answer. Back then, the area code was 209 here. So I'd tell them, you know, it's 559 now, but I tell them anytime you get a 209 number on your thing, you'll know it's me. It'll be random, you know, so-and-so's house that I'm calling from, but and they don't know it. And worst case scenario, they call Pac Bell and say, hey, you know, there's this long distance call that showed up on my bill. And back in the day, Pac Bell would just take it off the bill and say, yeah, your neighbor's phone, they must have a similar kind of cordless phone, and it bled over to your line and accidentally called out from your phone rather than their own. So that was one of the ways it worked pretty much all throughout then. Now, as people got newer phones, the frequencies, eventually they start, you know, the phone companies were, you know, changing some of their stuff, their designs and stuff. So but I wasn't around too much longer, you know, for all that.
So that's my next question. We can stay. Listen, I don't really do the war stories. I don't really glorify the bullshit, just for the simple fact that I've worked so hard to change my life and my lifestyle. So the people that I have on here is almost like a redemption story. Now, not that you're a redemption story, but I want to know, what was the deciding moment that you're no longer in this life?
Well, I had originally planned on only doing it for a while, and I had, you know, when Marcelo would sit us down, he would have us do work too. He didn't just have us selling weed or crank for him and stuff, or whatever drugs he was helping us connect to other people when we were sort of smaller scale drug dealers. He would actually say, hey, you know, so-and-so called me up. They need their garage fixed. And I'll make sure you guys, minimum wage was like $4.25, I think, back then. I'll make sure you guys get $10 an hour straight cash. So he would actually get us to do responsible stuff too. He wasn't just some scumbag on the street, you know, kind of guy. He would tell us, I don't think it's smart for you guys to be involved in this over the long term. I wouldn't want my own kids doing it. In fact, he didn't want his own kids doing it, even though, you know, he had one our age who did and didn't care. And it used to tick him off too, stuff like that. And so I had already said by New Year's Day in 2000, which I would have been 25 by then, I was going to be done with. That didn't happen. I kept going, but at least mentally I had always gone in with the projection that I'm out. And so the other thing too was at 18, I had gotten arrested for grand theft and burglary, and I had to plead. This is during the 3 strikes era. 1994, California passed a law in November of 1994. I was arrested, I want to say February or March of 94. So I barely missed the 3 strikes law. If I had done the same thing a year later or 8 months or whatever later, it would have been a much different story. And so I got sentenced under the old rules, so I was allowed to go to college, and I had to maintain a B average or better. When I didn't tell the mob initially that I had been arrested because I thought they would think I was a snitch, or that I was a risk, or even less than a snitch. I thought they might think I was too irresponsible, that I'm getting arrested for other stuff that had nothing to do with them. And they're going to be like, why would you be doing other crimes when we've got this? You know, what are you, a dumbass? You know, and the answer would have been, yeah, actually I am. You know, I am a dumbass. You know, now that I look back at it, yes, I was.
Yeah, same.
That's an honest answer. So, but yeah, so I got a deal where I had to go to college, B average or better. My co-defendant, just so everybody knows the kind of guys I was around, who also was a Marcelo school graduate, decided to stay in county jail. And it was like, I want to say 6 months or something. He gets out. We both are on probation. And he ended up going to prison, I want to say 2-3 times, and he's been out for quite a while now. But he went in and started going in and out throughout the 90s and into the 2000s, in and out. That cycle.
That revolving door.
And I saw that myself, and my mob friends were, when I finally told them, hey, look, they want to offer me a deal to go to school. they were like, wow, that's a great freaking deal. Take that deal. So I actually had the mob and my Mexican cartel friends saying, take that deal, homie. Take that deal, homie.
It's a win-win situation.
And so, but the good thing is that started steering me in the right direction. I went to school, I was on probation, and that changed things. I stopped going out of state with drugs on me and taking chances like that. I would have them fly in and I would meet them and get the diggity, that's the bomb stuff, the dank, the diggity connected from Mendocino, Mendo, Humboldt. You know, I'd get it set up and then they would get it out. Later, it evolved to gambling. Now, obviously, they didn't necessarily praise this because they're wanting me to necessarily go get a degree. They see it as an opportunity. Once you get into college, it's like, now we can start doing some gambling stuff because there's a bunch of college kids.
Right.
You know, there's other stuff we can do now. That's how the mob works. There's always an angle, an angle. And believe me, even when they're telling you to do something that appears to be good, you better believe they have an alternative. There's another motive there. And there's something else that they're going to get out of it. You're not just getting the Citizenship Award of the Year plaque for nothing. You better believe they got the guys that handed that award to you bought off for some other thing, you know. But
it's going to be lucrative one way or another for them.
It is what it is, you know.
Absolutely. So we can move forward now to the present day a little bit. You are the host, one of the co-hosts of the Hootie and JC show, a podcast on YouTube with my guy Hootie on it. Can you talk about that? Can you tell my audience what that show is about?
Yeah. With Hootie, you know, I met him after all this stuff. You know, he had been involved with the Gambinos back there in the 90s and into the 2000s. I think he was arrested last in 2015, I want to say, or 2012, 2011, something like that. So fairly recent, you know, and so I didn't know him then, but I clicked with him quite well because he was in the weed business back in the day, and obviously I was too. And M. Cowley, who also is a co-host, he was out here, you know, and so M. Cowley can relate to you guys on another level. I don't mean you as in you didn't. I don't know if you went to jail or prison yourself, but with them, they've all gone. I have never had to go to prison. The longest I had was, you know, 90 days in a program because I caught the tail end of the 3 strikes law the last time I was arrested. So I got lucky with the pre-end, got it right as they were reforming it, you know, in 2011, 2012, the last time I was in the system. But so Mike M. Cowley, Michael, he had the growing thing. He was doing what I was doing, except he was actually growing and like tending to the farms and the plants and knowing he loves it. He was sleeping out there with those plants, you know, freaking the plants were providing him comfort, you know, and he gets arrested by the DEA. They fly a Black Hawk helicopter down on him into a ravine up there because it's mountainous. You know, could you imagine that? You're you know, you get arrested by a Black Hawk helicopter just going around and just stalking you, you know, and then they come get you, you know, like those black whatever it was, those 80s movies where they'd show like Rambo running from a helicopter, except this thing ain't going away. And so he went in there for a year, you know, so he knows that part of it too. He was threatened with a RICO case. In fact, he pled to a RICO case here in California. Racketeer Influence Corrupt Organization Act, same stuff that all the mob guys back there get. So between me, Michael, and Hootie, Anthony Russo, you've got 2 mob guys, 3 weed guys, and 2 guys who've been to prison. All wrapped into 3, you know, relatively handsome-looking fellas. You know,
I'll tell you what, and your show is entertaining as all hell. You know, I don't miss an episode. I'm always tuned in. You know, I've had several conversations with you. Me and Hootie. Hootie did my show before I even understood how this whole podcasting thing worked. You know, so shout outs to him.
Yeah. I remember seeing him and Gene on your show too before I met either one of them. I originally met Gene on and knew him for a while after he got out. And then I saw him on the interview with Vlad where John Alight brought him on, which I think was a great move on Alight's part. Sneak your friend onto Vlad's show or whatever he did. You know, Vlad's a little out. I won't say anything because I may want to go on there, but Vlad is a Vlad. We'll say he's got his own thing there, and I like how John kind of snuck in and did a Vlad move on Vlad. But you know, so Dean and I were cool online and chatted, and then I started hearing more of his stuff. I'm like, man, and I saw him on your thing. And he and I got along, and you know, he could tell by the words I used, you know, what was up, and I told him some of the stuff. He asked me who I was on record with, and I talked to him, and he's like, "Oh, wow, okay, I know what you're doing here," and I started meeting them all from there, you know, and so now we have our YouTube mafia, you know,
it's crazy.
We're crazy. You know, the feds ain't letting the feds never let us set up what we wanted to do back in the day, but now we're going to get our chance. Now that we're gonna have a YouTube Cosa Nostra here, you know.
Right. And now I got one last question for you because I don't like to keep my guests. I found that in this era, it's hard to keep a captivated audience for anything longer. You know, I don't want to burn that out.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So you had mentioned that you take your daughter to church. Can we talk about your spiritual journey from the time you ended that life till now?
Sure. You know,
if you're comfortable with it.
Yeah, you know, yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the first moments that I realized that, you know, that this was not a good thing is in '94. I was nearly arrested. I sort of alluded to it earlier here. I was bringing in a load to Detroit on the Greyhound bus there, and I was nearly picked up by 4 undercovers, and I know who they were because we were told later on who they were. And the next day when I left, 2 of them came up to me and asked me for my ID. You know, of course, I didn't give it to them, and they didn't show me theirs either. But there were 2 of the 4 that I saw. So they were probably FBI, DEA. They may have been Michigan State Police. Right. But they came up to me in front of a bunch of people, and they do that stuff deliberate. And I'm you know, we're leaving Detroit on a Greyhound. Normally I would have flown out or whatever. I'm not going to take a bus there and one on back. That's 3 days on the bus from California to Michigan. And, you know, so 6 total if you're going there and back without flying back. But we decided, all right, you got to take the bus back because you were almost arrested. It'll look really, really bad if you arrive on a Greyhound and you leave on a United Air flight the next day. It'll look really bad. And so, but at the same time, I had to get out of the state quick. So they came up to me, and when we're driving off for the first 2 hours, it seemed like nobody would look at me, you know, and I'd look around and I'm like, man, you know, and I just felt it. You know what I mean? When you feel it, when a crowd, when the vibe is that you're a scumbag, dude. We just saw, they know that these had to be federal agents or undercover cops of some type because they made it clear.
Right.
And so and then later on, the first girls who talked to me were these college chicks, and they're like, what was that about? You know, and they're these suburban type girls, you know, I had nothing. You wouldn't understand, you know, blah, blah. And I'm playing the tough role, you know, and I'm just internally, I'm just fuming and just feeling weird, you know. And finally, like, I'm hearing these college kids on the bus talking about spring break and what they're going to do. And their problems just sounded so little to the problems I have right now. You know, their problems are, I didn't get my homework done. Mine is the DEA wants to freaking arrest me, you know. And so that was the first moment that I know for a fact that I really, really thought about God or Jesus or any of that for a good 2 years or so, maybe longer. And it didn't change my life per se, but that's the first moment. Nowadays, I take my daughter was, I lost her in 2011, 2012, and for 2 years, and I had to do supervised visits and whatnot. And I'll get into that more as well. I've touched on it a bit on our show, but with that, I had 2 years away from her. And then when I finally won in civil court to have her on the weekends, unsupervised again, I go to pick her up. I asked my daughter, who was 7 by then, what have you been doing the last couple of years? My daughter says, I've been praying to Jesus every morning and every night to just give me my daddy back. And I had to stop my car. I couldn't drive. And so my daughter lives every other weekend. She's with her mom up in the mountains of California in the Yosemite area. And then I'm on the valley floor. So when she's with me, there's a church down here that's like in the hood that we like to go to that's chill. When she's up there, her mom drops her off at church and I go meet her there and I spend that, an hour with her on that Sunday. And we get a chance to hang out. I love both of the places. They have each of their unique things about them. And I love it that the people are largely not fake. Most of the people there have been through the stuff. There's lots of old homeboy types at the one down here, guys who've been to the Pinta, and dudes that are my age and our age range that are just tired of it and they're over that garbage. Right. And it's good because it's sort of like, the comparison that I've heard, guys who've been in the game for years or were in the life or the system, they compare it to being war veterans. And eventually you got to withdraw from the battle and you got to get out of the war. You got to stop with the gang banging, stop with the mob stuff. You got to pull out of the war and you got to mentally let the war go away and stop thinking like that. You got to stop thinking like a dude in the street and start thinking like a man that wants to care for his community, his children, people around him, his neighbors, his God, his country, etc. So it's great because we all can relate to one another in different ways, and God willing, it'll stay like that.
That's the hit, right? That's what we hope and pray for.
Yes.
JC,
well,
man,
I appreciate that. How you don't. Some of these shows, these guys will go off on these ramble about how they did this to this guy and that, and they talk about violence and other stuff in such ways that it makes me wonder if they're really over it or not. And with us, if I talk about any stuff, drugs, trafficking, or anything, I make sure to point out, you do not want to do that. It was one of the worst decisions in my life to get involved with any of this stuff. And if I could go back, I wouldn't do it. I would find a way to have my same daughter. But other than that, pretty much most of the stuff in terms of the street stuff would be out the door, and I would, why get arrested to go to college when you could have just enrolled without having to go on probation first? Exactly. Most guys that end up in the system, bro, end up going to school one way or another. If you're in county jail or state prison here, guys are finishing high school behind bars, and then they take 2 years of college or whatever. And so most guys, you end up going to school one way or another. So for those of you younger out there, do you want to do your schoolwork from a county jail cell, or do you want to do it where you can, talk to women and enjoy life and just be a young dude, So I hope you guys choose the right route with that. I really do. If you need anything, you hit up any of us from our show or lots of others. So
most definitely, and that's something that like people always ask me where I find my guests or why do I bring people on that I see fit or whatever. And it's the story, it's the struggle, it's the climb, and it's the success, and that's what it's about. What does that success piece look like for you today? Is it just being able to spend quality time with your daughter?
Well, aside from just being a father, which obviously, being a dad is the biggest blessing in life that any man can have. That most that's your destiny in life, is to make sure that your genes are passed on through somebody else, right? That's the ultimate, that that you made your mark on this planet. And so aside from that, obviously taking care of other things, I like to keep myself busy with different business ventures. I like to see others succeed. If I can include other people in on stuff, I certainly do. you know, because even in the criminal underworld, the reason why I got where I got was because others helped me open up doors, and they opened up doors for me. You know, people did things for me that got me to where I got, you know. So I really feel that when you have, for those who have been given much, there's a lot asked from you as well. You know, my grandfather designed the Norden bomb site, which, for those who you don't know, that's the bombing sites that were used on our planes in World War II to bomb the Nazis into the ground. And, you know, he was an engineer. He came from nothing. He designed something that made its mark on the world big time. Right. But he didn't ask for any glory out of it. I didn't even know he did this until he was almost gone. And that's how that generation was. They did all, our grandfathers and generation did so much for us, fighting wars and all kinds of stuff we could only imagine. And for those of you who think, well, we have a tough time today. Yeah, we have a pretty crazy world. But you're not looking at the news each day and seeing, oh, Hitler invaded another country. Right. Okay, 6 months later, oh, he invaded somebody else now. You know, you're not seeing it like that. And those guys, they did their job for us, and they went back and didn't want, you don't see people, they didn't clout chase and all that stuff, you know. So cool. It would be a big insult. I was taught better than that. You don't go around bragging about what you do. And, you know, that stuff irritates guys anyways. One of the most, you know, from your old street days too, some of the most irritating guys were the ones who talked about, I got this and and you know they're lying 2/3 of it, maybe more, and they're just annoying. They're clowns. There's all kinds of stuff with that. If you're really doing something, you keep your mouth shut about it and just do your duty to your fellow man. And so that in today's world, I do my duty. I take care of my daughter. I help out with the community. If you know, there's all kinds of things that I'll do, mainly small things, and that's all we really can do. You help out with your community. If everybody helps out in their local area, you'd be amazed on what you can do for the world at large.
Most definitely. Most definitely. JC, man, it has been an absolute pleasure. I appreciate you. Before you go, I ask all my guests this because I asked all the questions. Is there anything you want to ask me before we get out of here?
You know, I'll rather than asking you anything, I'll just say, hey, you know, keep up what you're doing. You know, just from the first, you know, when I first saw you with the Gene Borello one, I didn't even know that was one of your first shows. I thought you're a guy that had a bunch of these under your belt already. You know, it just showed up in my random. I click on it because it was Gene, right? And I'm watching it. I'm like, man, this guy, the guy interviewing him flows and does good. And, you know, so I don't know what you did prior to this, but whatever you've done, education or work-wise, has prepped you for it. So keep up what you're doing, okay?
I appreciate that, JC. We'll see each other again soon, most definitely.
All right, bro. Thank you so much. And thank you to your fans, too, for your time today with us.
Most definitely, JC. Have a blessed night. And for everybody that's watching, that was another episode of Spittin' with Spitter. For all your vaping needs, go to Lehigh Vape at 822 Nazareth Pike. Tell them Large Mars sent you. Go get what you need, man. Hey, JC, have a blessed night. And for that, we are out of here, y'all. Have a good evening.